The silence in the glass-walled conference room was suffocating as Marcus Thompson's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Nina, your campaign concepts are frankly embarrassing. I don't know how you even got this job." His words hung in the atmosphere while 6 potential clients from Morrison Associates shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs, watching my supposed public execution unfold before their eyes. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus leaned back in his executive chair, a satisfied smirk playing across his lips as he gestured dismissively at my presentation materials scattered across the polished conference table. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is exactly why Sterling Creative Agency maintains such rigorous quality control. We simply cannot allow subpar work to represent our brand." The morning sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows seemed to spotlight my humiliation as Patricia Hayes from HR nodded approvingly beside him, her pen clicking against her notepad in a rhythmic pattern of anticipated documentation. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from the effort it took to maintain my composed exterior. Kevin Walsh, our senior VP, avoided eye contact entirely, studying his smartphone with sudden fascination while Lisa Chen, the office manager, actually smiled at my apparent downfall. These people had no idea what was coming their way. My name is Nina Rodriguez. I'm 29 years old, and what happened in that conference room in Denver changed everything. But not in the way Marcus Thompson and his loyal followers expected. What they didn't know was that their perfect little setup had just triggered the most satisfying revelation of my entire career. Sterling Creative Agency occupied 3 floors of a gleaming downtown Denver high-rise, its modern glass facade reflecting the Rocky Mountains in the distance. The agency had built its reputation on cutting-edge marketing campaigns for major corporations, and Marcus never let anyone forget that he was the mastermind behind it all. At least, that's what he wanted everyone to believe. The morning of the Morrison Associates presentation had started like any other Tuesday. I arrived at 7:30, my usual time, carrying my coffee from the lobby cafe and reviewing my notes one final time. The campaign I developed for Morrison's new product launch represented months of research, consumer analysis, and creative development. It was solid work, innovative even, and I knew it would deliver results. Marcus had requested this meeting specifically to showcase what he called the future of Sterling's creative direction to our potential new client. Morrison Associates represented a $15 million annual contract, the kind of account that could define an agency's trajectory for years to come. James Morrison himself had flown in from Chicago with his executive team to evaluate our capabilities. The presentation had been scheduled for 9 o'clock in Conference Room A, the agency's most impressive space with its panoramic city views and state-of-the-art technology. I'd spent the weekend preparing, refining every detail of my pitch, ensuring that each slide told a compelling story about how we could transform Morrison's brand presence in the marketplace. What I hadn't anticipated was Marcus's decision to turn my presentation into a public spectacle of professional destruction. He'd invited not just the Morrison team but also Patricia Hayes from HR, Kevin Walsh from senior management, and Lisa Chen ostensibly to observe our collaborative process. The real reason became clear within minutes of my opening remarks. Every suggestion I made was met with theatrical sighs and dismissive gestures from Marcus. When I presented consumer demographic research, he interrupted to question my methodology. When I outlined creative concepts, he shook his head visibly, making faces at the Morrison team as if to say, "Can you believe this amateur?" The performance was masterful in its cruelty, designed to position him as the seasoned professional cleaning up after incompetent subordinates. "Nina, I think what you're missing here is the fundamental understanding of brand positioning." Marcus had continued, standing up to pace behind his chair like a professor addressing a particularly slow student. Morrison Associates didn't achieve their market dominance by following trendy marketing fads. They need strategic thinking, not creative experiments. James Morrison, a distinguished man in his 50s with silver-streaked hair, watched this exchange with growing discomfort. His marketing director, Sarah Chen, glanced between Marcus and me with visible confusion. They'd clearly come expecting a professional presentation, not a public humiliation disguised as quality control. Marcus pulled up his own presentation on the large monitor, replacing my carefully crafted slides with his version of the campaign strategy. His approach was safe, predictable, relying on tactics that had worked 5 years ago but felt stale in today's dynamic marketplace. The Morrison team's enthusiasm visibly dimmed as he walked through concepts that could have come from any generic marketing playbook. "This is how Sterling Creative Agency delivers results," Marcus announced, clicking through slides filled with stock photography and recycled messaging frameworks. "We don't waste our clients' time with untested theories. We provide proven solutions backed by executive oversight and quality assurance." Patricia Hayes dutifully took notes, no doubt preparing documentation that would support whatever disciplinary action Marcus had planned for me. Kevin Walsh nodded along, his loyalty to upper management overriding any professional integrity. Lisa Chen continued her subtle celebration of my apparent downfall, probably already planning how to spread the story throughout the office gossip network. But as Marcus continued his presentation, something interesting happened. James Morrison's expression shifted from polite attention to barely concealed boredom. His team began exchanging glances, the kind of silent communication that occurs when experienced professionals recognize mediocrity disguised as expertise. Sarah Chen actually stifled a yawn during Marcus's explanation of traditional brand messaging fundamentals. I remained seated at the far end of the conference table, my hands folded calmly in my lap, watching the entire performance with what I hoped appeared to be chastened acceptance. Inside, however, my mind was racing through calculations and contingency plans that I'd been developing for months. Marcus had no idea that his public humiliation of me was about to become the catalyst for revelations that would reshape everything he thought he knew about Sterling Creative Agency. The irony wasn't lost on me that he'd chosen this particular moment, in front of this specific client, to demonstrate his dominance. James Morrison and his team weren't just potential customers evaluating our creative capabilities. They represented something far more significant to the future of this agency, something that Marcus's arrogance had blinded him to completely. When Marcus finally concluded his presentation, the conference room felt heavy with disappointed expectations. The Morrison team maintained professional courtesy, but their initial enthusiasm for partnering with Sterling Creative Agency had clearly evaporated. James Morrison glanced at his watch, probably calculating how quickly he could extract himself from this awkward situation. "Well," James said diplomatically, "this certainly gives us a lot to consider. Perhaps we should schedule a follow-up meeting once we've had time to review both approaches more thoroughly." His tone suggested that no such meeting would ever occur. Marcus, apparently oblivious to the lukewarm reception his presentation had received, beamed with satisfaction. "Of course, Mr. Morrison, I think you'll find that Sterling's proven methodology speaks for itself. We look forward to hearing from you soon." As the Morrison team began gathering their materials, preparing to leave what had clearly become a wasted trip to Denver, I realized that the moment I'd been anticipating for months had finally arrived. Marcus had played his hand exactly as I'd expected, demonstrating the kind of short-sighted arrogance that had been undermining Sterling Creative Agency's potential since he'd taken over as CEO. What he didn't know was that his decision to humiliate me in front of James Morrison had just set in motion a series of events that would expose not only his incompetence, but also the deeper truths about ownership, control, and the real power structure at Sterling Creative Agency. The silent partner he'd never bothered to identify was about to speak up, and the conversation was going to be very different from what anyone in that room expected. The morning sunlight continued streaming through those floor-to-ceiling windows, but the atmosphere in Conference Room A was about to change dramatically. Marcus Thompson thought he'd just demonstrated his executive authority and creative superiority. Instead, he'd just provided the perfect setup for the most important business lesson of his career. I smoothed my jacket and cleared my throat softly, drawing attention back to my end of the conference table. The Morrison team paused in their preparations to leave, sensing that something unexpected was about to unfold. Patricia Hayes looked up from her notepad with anticipation, probably hoping to witness additional evidence for whatever disciplinary file she was building against me. Marcus turned toward me with barely concealed irritation, clearly annoyed that I was prolonging what he considered a closed matter. "Yes, Nina, I think we've covered everything that needed to be addressed today." I reached into my leather portfolio, feeling everyone's eyes on me as I withdrew a slim folder containing documents that I'd been carrying to meetings like this for the past 6 months. The papers inside represented months of legal preparation, strategic planning, and patient waiting for exactly the right moment to reveal information that would transform everyone's understanding of the situation. The silence stretched for several heartbeats as I placed the folder on the conference table, my movements deliberate and unhurried. James Morrison settled back into his chair, his experienced instincts telling him that whatever was about to happen would be worth observing. His marketing director leaned forward slightly, her professional curiosity piqued by the sudden shift in dynamics. Marcus's confidence began showing hairline cracks as he watched me organize the documents with the kind of careful precision that suggested deep preparation rather than desperate improvisation. Patricia Hayes stopped her note-taking, sensing that the morning script was about to deviate significantly from her expectations. "Actually, Marcus," I said, my voice carrying a calm authority that hadn't been present during my earlier humiliation, "I think there are a few things about Sterling Creative Agency that our guests should understand before they make any final decisions about our partnership potential." The morning was about to become very interesting indeed. The documents I spread across the polished conference table carried the letterhead of Hartwell and Associates, one of Denver's most prestigious corporate law firms. Marcus's eyes narrowed as he tried to process what he was seeing, his confident smirk fading into confusion. The first page clearly displayed my name alongside legal terminology that made Patricia Hayes lean forward in her chair, her pen hovering uncertainly above her notepad. "What exactly are you trying to prove here, Nina?" Marcus demanded, though his voice had lost some of its earlier commanding tone. "This isn't the time for dramatic gestures. Our guests have important decisions to make about their marketing strategy."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
I looked directly at James Morrison, whose experienced eyes were already scanning the documents with the kind of focused attention that comes from decades of business negotiations. His marketing director, Sarah Chen, had stopped gathering her materials entirely, recognizing that whatever was unfolding was far more significant than a simple employee dispute. "Morrison," I said, addressing him directly while ignoring Marcus's increasingly agitated expression, "I believe you should understand the complete picture of Sterling Creative Agency before making any commitments. These documents outline the actual ownership structure of this company." The color began draining from Marcus's face as James Morrison reached for the papers, his silver-streaked eyebrows rising as he read the first paragraph. Sarah Chen moved closer to review the documents alongside her boss, both of them displaying the kind of sharp focus that had built Morrison Associates into a market-leading corporation. Kevin Walsh finally looked up from his smartphone, sensing that the morning's dynamics had shifted dramatically. Lisa Chen's celebration of my apparent downfall transformed into nervous uncertainty as she watched Marcus struggle to maintain his composure. Patricia Hayes continued taking notes, but her confident documentation had become hesitant scribbling. "According to these incorporation records," James Morrison said slowly, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to navigating complex business structures, "Sterling Creative Agency operates under a partnership agreement that differs significantly from what we were led to understand." Marcus stepped forward, his hand extended as if to reclaim the documents. "Those papers are confidential company information. Nina had no authority to share internal records with outside parties." "Actually," I replied calmly, "as a 42% stakeholder in Sterling Creative Agency, I have every right to ensure that potential business partners understand our organizational structure, especially when those partners are being misled about who they're actually negotiating with." The silence that followed was profound. Marcus's mouth opened and closed without producing sound, his mind clearly racing to process information that contradicted everything he thought he knew about his own company. Patricia Hayes dropped her pen entirely, staring at me as if I'd suddenly sprouted wings. Kevin Walsh looked between Marcus and me with dawning comprehension that his political calculations had been based on fundamentally flawed assumptions. 42%, Marcus finally managed to stammer. "That's impossible. I own Sterling Creative Agency. I built this company from nothing." I reached into my portfolio again, withdrawing additional documents that detailed the investment history of Sterling Creative Agency over the past 3 years. The papers told a story of strategic capital infusions, carefully structured partnerships, and legal agreements that had transformed a struggling boutique agency into Denver's fastest-growing marketing firm. "You built Sterling into a promising startup," I acknowledged, my tone remaining professional despite the obvious shock radiating from Marcus and his supporters. "But when you needed capital to expand, to hire talented staff, to compete for major contracts like Morrison Associates, you accepted investment from Meridian Holdings LLC." James Morrison nodded approvingly as he reviewed the financial documentation. His experience with corporate structures was evident in how quickly he grasped the implications of what I was revealing. Sarah Chen whispered something to her boss, probably confirming her own understanding of the partnership arrangements. Meridian Holdings, Marcus repeated weakly, his face pale as recognition began dawning. The silent partner who never attended meetings, never visited the office, never interfered with operations. Never interfered until now, I corrected gently. Meridian Holdings has been content to remain silent as long as Sterling Creative Agency maintained its growth trajectory and professional reputation. However, recent management decisions have raised concerns about the company's direction and leadership effectiveness. The morning sunlight streaming through the conference room windows seemed to illuminate Marcus's growing realization that his understanding of his own company had been catastrophically incomplete. Patricia Hayes reached for her phone, probably calculating whether she needed to contact the agency's legal department. Kevin Walsh had gone completely silent, his political instincts warning him to avoid taking sides until the dust settled. Lisa Chen looked genuinely confused, her office gossip network apparently having failed to uncover one of the most significant facts about Sterling Creative Agency's ownership structure. The woman who had spent months cultivating favor with Marcus was beginning to understand that her intelligence gathering had missed the most important detail of all. "You're telling me," Marcus said slowly, his executive confidence crumbling with each word, "that Nina Rodriguez is Meridian Holdings." "Nina Rodriguez is the managing partner of Meridian Holdings," I clarified, enjoying the precision of legal language that Marcus had clearly never bothered to investigate. "Which makes her the majority stakeholder in Sterling Creative Agency, with full authority over strategic decisions, personnel matters, and client relationships." James Morrison leaned back in his leather chair, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth as he processed the complete reversal of everything he'd witnessed during the morning's presentation. His marketing director was openly grinning now, recognizing that they'd just observed one of the most spectacular demonstrations of corporate misdirection she'd ever seen. "So when you humiliated Nina in front of potential clients," Sarah Chen said to Marcus, her voice carrying a note of professional admiration for the complexity of what had just unfolded, "you were actually undermining your own majority stakeholders' presentation to Morrison Associates." The implications of Marcus's behavior were becoming clear to everyone in the room. His theatrical dismissal of my marketing concepts hadn't just been unprofessional, it had been a direct attack on the creative vision of Sterling Creative Agency's actual controlling partner. His attempt to position himself as the sophisticated alternative to my amateur approach had revealed his complete ignorance of the company's real power structure. Marcus sank into his chair, his morning triumph transformed into professional catastrophe. The man who had spent the last hour demonstrating his executive authority and creative superiority was discovering that he'd been publicly humiliating his own boss while undermining his company's most important business development opportunity. "How long have you known?" he asked weakly, his voice barely audible in the suddenly quiet conference room. "Known what, Marcus?" I replied, though we both understood exactly what he was asking. "Known that you were planning to sabotage my presentation. Known that you'd invited HR and senior management to witness what you hoped would be my professional destruction. Known that you've been systematically undermining Sterling's creative capabilities to advance your own reputation." Patricia Hayes was frantically reviewing her notes, probably realizing that her documentation of my supposed incompetence had actually recorded a majority stakeholder being attacked by her own employee. Kevin Walsh had started calculating how quickly he could distance himself from Marcus's leadership team. Lisa Chen looked like she wanted to disappear entirely. "I've been monitoring Sterling Creative Agency's operations very carefully," I continued, my voice carrying the authority that comes with actual ownership rather than presumed control. "Meridian Holdings invested in this company because of its potential, but recent management decisions have been concerning. Today's performance simply confirmed that changes are necessary." James Morrison was clearly enjoying the unexpected entertainment, but his business instincts were also processing the practical implications of what he'd witnessed. Morrison Associates needed marketing partners who demonstrated professional competence and strategic thinking. The morning's events had provided a clear demonstration of which approach aligned with their corporate values. "Miss Rodriguez," James said formally, "I think Morrison Associates would be very interested in discussing a partnership with Sterling Creative Agency. However, we'd prefer to work directly with the actual decision-makers rather than intermediaries, who may not accurately represent the company's capabilities." The message was unmistakable. Morrison Associates wanted to work with me, not Marcus. The $15 million annual contract that Marcus had been positioning as his personal achievement was slipping away from him in real time, redirected toward the woman he'd just spent an hour humiliating in front of the very clients he'd hoped to impress. Marcus made one last desperate attempt to salvage his position. "Nina, I think there's been a misunderstanding. My presentation approach was designed to demonstrate Sterling's quality control processes. I was actually showcasing your work by providing constructive feedback in a collaborative environment." The revision of history was so transparently false that even Patricia Hayes looked skeptical. Kevin Walsh studied his shoes with sudden fascination, unwilling to support such an obvious fabrication. Lisa Chen remained silent, her political instincts finally warning her that aligning with Marcus was a career-limiting decision. "Marcus," I said gently, "we both know exactly what happened here. You designed this meeting to publicly undermine my credibility while positioning yourself as Sterling's creative authority. You invited witnesses to document what you hoped would be my professional failure. You presented Morrison Associates with outdated marketing strategies while dismissing innovative approaches that could actually drive their business growth." Sarah Chen nodded approvingly, her appreciation for strategic thinking evident in her expression. James Morrison was already reaching for his business card holder, preparing to formalize a relationship with Sterling Creative Agency under its actual leadership structure rather than Marcus's misguided representation. The morning had transformed from Marcus's planned demonstration of executive dominance into a comprehensive exposure of his professional limitations and ethical failures. The man who had arrived at conference room confident in his authority and creative superiority was discovering that his understanding of his own company had been fundamentally flawed from the beginning. "There are going to be some changes at Sterling Creative Agency," I announced, my tone leaving no doubt about the seriousness of the situation. "Changes in leadership, changes in creative direction, and changes in how we represent ourselves to clients and partners." The documents spread across the conference table told the complete story of Sterling Creative Agency's actual ownership structure, investment history, and legal framework. Marcus's dramatic presentation had been based on assumptions about power and authority that bore no relationship to reality. His attempt to destroy my credibility had instead revealed his own ignorance about the company he thought he controlled. James Morrison stood up, extending his hand toward me with the kind of respect that Marcus had been desperately seeking all morning. "Miss Rodriguez, Morrison Associates looks forward to working with Sterling Creative Agency under your leadership. Perhaps we could schedule a proper presentation once you've had time to address your internal management issues." The handshake represented more than just a business agreement. It was recognition of competence over arrogance, strategic thinking over theatrical posturing, and actual authority over presumed control. Marcus watched helplessly as the contract he'd been pursuing transferred to the woman he'd just humiliated, the client relationship he'd hoped to claim slipping away along with his credibility and professional standing. The morning sunlight continued streaming through those floor-to-ceiling windows, but the power dynamics in Conference Room A had been completely transformed. Marcus Thompson's demonstration of executive authority had become a masterclass in how quickly arrogance can destroy careers when it encounters actual competence and preparation. The Morrison team departed with handshakes and promises of detailed follow-up meetings, leaving Conference Room A in a state of stunned silence. Marcus remained slumped in his executive chair, staring at the legal documents that had just dismantled his entire understanding of his professional situation. Patricia Hayes clutched her notepad like a shield, her carefully documented evidence of my supposed incompetence now reading like a record of corporate insubordination. Kevin Walsh finally broke the silence with a question that revealed just how deep the deception had run. "Nina, when you say 42% stakeholder, does that mean you've been working here under false pretenses? Were you spying on Sterling Creative Agency for some competitor?" I gathered the Meridian Holdings documentation with deliberate care, allowing the weight of his misunderstanding to settle over the room before responding. The truth was far more complex than simple corporate espionage, involving months of strategic planning that had anticipated exactly this kind of confrontation. "Kevin, I haven't been working under false pretenses. I've been working under my own name, in my own company, doing exactly the job I was hired to do." The false pretenses belonged to Marcus, who assumed that signing incorporation papers made him the ultimate authority at Sterling Creative Agency without bothering to read the partnership agreements he was executing. Lisa Chen spoke up for the first time since the Morrison team's departure, her voice uncertain as she tried to navigate the completely altered political landscape. "But you've been taking direction from Marcus for months. You attended his staff meetings, followed his project assignments, submitted reports to his office. How could you be his boss while acting like his employee? The question revealed the sophisticated nature of the strategy I'd been implementing since joining Sterling Creative Agency as their new marketing director. Most people assumed that ownership and operational hierarchy were identical, but corporate structures often involved far more nuanced arrangements than traditional employment relationships suggested. Sterling Creative Agency needed operational leadership, while Meridian Holdings maintained strategic oversight. I explained, watching Marcus's face as he began processing the full scope of what had been happening under his nose. Marcus has genuine talent for client relations and project management. The investment partnership was designed to support those strengths, while providing capital for growth and strategic guidance for long-term development. Patricia Hayes looked up from her notepad with obvious confusion. Then why didn't you just tell him about the ownership structure from the beginning? Why work as his subordinate if you had authority to direct company operations? The answer involved lessons about leadership, trust, and character assessment that Marcus was about to learn in the most direct way possible. Meridian Holdings had invested in Sterling Creative Agency based on its potential, but potential required competent leadership to become actual success. The past few months had been an extended evaluation period to determine whether Marcus possessed the qualities necessary for effective partnership. Patricia, imagine you're considering a major investment in someone's character and professional capabilities. Would you base that decision on how they behave when they know they're being evaluated, or would you prefer to observe their natural leadership style when they believe they have complete autonomy? Marcus finally looked up from the documents, his expression shifting from confusion to dawning comprehension. You were testing me, these months, watching how I managed the agency, how I treated staff, how I handled client relationships. You were deciding whether Meridian Holdings would maintain the partnership or exercise majority control. The realization was written across his face as he connected the dots between his behavior and the strategic position he'd unknowingly been jeopardizing. Every dismissive comment about my marketing concepts, every condescending explanation of how real business works, every public demonstration of his supposed superiority had been carefully observed and evaluated by the very person he'd been trying to impress with his executive authority. Marcus Sterling Creative Agency has incredible potential. The client base is solid, the creative talent is exceptional, and the market opportunities are significant. But potential requires leadership that builds rather than undermines, that elevates rather than diminishes, that recognizes talent rather than feeling threatened by it. Kevin Walsh was frantically taking his own notes now, probably calculating how to position himself advantageously in whatever corporate restructuring was about to unfold. His political instincts were finally recognizing that his loyalty to Marcus had been based on a fundamental misunderstanding of the company's power structure. Lisa Chen remained silent, but her expression suggested she was reviewing every office interaction through the new lens of my actual position within Sterling Creative Agency. The woman who had been documenting and sharing my supposed failures was beginning to understand that her gossip network had been unwittingly reporting on the majority stakeholders' daily activities. The morning's presentation was particularly illuminating. I continued, maintaining the professional tone that had carried me through Marcus's attempted humiliation. Not just because of how you chose to treat a colleague in front of important clients, but because of what that treatment revealed about your fundamental approach to leadership and collaboration. Marcus's defensive instincts finally engaged, though his position for mounting any meaningful defense had been completely compromised. Nina, if you had concerns about my management style, why didn't you address them directly? Why create this elaborate situation instead of simply discussing your observations? The question revealed his continued misunderstanding of what had transpired during the Morrison presentation. He still viewed the morning's events as something I had orchestrated rather than a natural consequence of choices he had made independently over several months of operational leadership. Marcus, I didn't create this situation. You designed this morning's presentation to demonstrate your creative authority by publicly undermining my work in front of potential clients. You invited witnesses specifically to document what you hoped would be my professional failure. You chose to position Morrison Associates as your personal achievement while dismissing innovative marketing strategies that could drive their business growth. Patricia Hayes was reviewing her notes with obvious discomfort, recognizing that her documentation had recorded a majority stakeholder being attacked by her own employee rather than the incompetent performance she had expected to witness. Her careful professional observations now read like evidence of corporate insubordination rather than quality control measures. The elaborate situation, as you call it, was entirely your creation. I simply responded to your choices with information that Morrison and Associates needed to make informed decisions about their potential partnership with Sterling Creative Agency. Kevin Walsh finally asked the question that everyone in the room was contemplating. So what happens now? Does this mean Marcus is fired? Are there going to be massive changes in how Sterling operates? The answer involved careful consideration of Sterling Creative Agency's long-term interests, which extended far beyond the personal dynamics that had created the morning's confrontation. Meridian Holdings had invested in the company's potential, and that potential included valuable elements of Marcus's leadership alongside areas that clearly required immediate improvement. Kevin, what happens now depends largely on Marcus's willingness to acknowledge the problems that led to this morning's situation and his commitment to implementing the changes necessary for Sterling Creative Agency to reach its full potential. Marcus looked up with something approaching hope, though his expression remained guarded as he processed the implications of what I was suggesting. The possibility that his professional survival might depend on his response to criticism was clearly unfamiliar territory for someone accustomed to operating with presumed ultimate authority. What kind of changes are you talking about? He asked carefully, his tone suggesting he was beginning to understand that his next words might determine his future with the company he thought he had built and controlled. The answer required addressing not just the immediate crisis of his leadership failures, but the deeper structural issues that had enabled such a comprehensive misunderstanding of Sterling Creative Agency's actual governance. Meridian Holdings needed operational partners who demonstrated both competence and character, qualities that could be developed but required genuine commitment to growth and change. Marcus' effective leadership requires recognizing and developing talent rather than feeling threatened by it. It requires building collaborative environments rather than hierarchical power structures. It requires understanding that client success depends on innovative thinking rather than safe predictability. Patricia Hayes was taking notes again, though her documentation had shifted from recording evidence against me to capturing what was essentially a performance review of the person she had assumed was my supervisor. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on anyone in the room. The changes Sterling Creative Agency needs involve restructuring leadership responsibilities to align with actual expertise rather than assumed authority. They involve developing systems that reward innovation and collaboration rather than political maneuvering and personal loyalty. They involve creating accountability measures that focus on results rather than appearances. Lisa Chen finally found her voice again, though her question revealed continued confusion about the practical implications of the morning's revelations. Nina, if you're the majority stakeholder, why have you been working regular hours, attending staff meetings, following project protocols like any other employee? The question touched on one of the most important aspects of effective ownership and leadership that Marcus had failed to understand during his tenure as Sterling's operational head. Real authority came from competence and contribution rather than titles and presumed control. Lisa, ownership doesn't exempt anyone from doing actual work or contributing real value. Meridian Holdings invested in Sterling Creative Agency because of its potential for growth and success, but realizing that potential requires everyone, including majority stakeholders, to contribute their best efforts toward shared goals. Marcus was listening with an intensity that suggested he was finally beginning to understand the magnitude of the lessons being presented to him. His assumptions about leadership, authority, and corporate structure were being systematically dismantled and replaced with concepts that challenged everything he thought he knew about running a business. The staff meetings, project protocols, and regular responsibilities weren't limitations on my authority. They were opportunities to understand Sterling's operations, evaluate its potential, and identify areas where strategic improvements could drive better results. You can't lead effectively from a distance, and you can't make good decisions without understanding the daily realities of the business you're trying to grow. Kevin Walsh was clearly struggling to process the complete reversal of his political calculations, but his next question suggested he was beginning to adapt to the new reality. So when you attended Marcus's leadership meetings and listened to his strategic presentations, you were actually evaluating his performance as Sterling's operational manager. The accuracy of his assessment was both impressive and concerning, revealing how much of Sterling's internal dynamics had been based on assumptions rather than actual understanding of the company's structure and governance. Kevin, every interaction provides information about leadership capabilities, strategic thinking, and character. Marcus's presentations, decision-making processes, and treatment of colleagues all contributed to Meridian Holdings' ongoing evaluation of Sterling Creative Agency's management effectiveness. The weight of constant observation and assessment was clearly settling on Marcus as he realized that months of what he had considered autonomous leadership had actually been an extended job interview with consequences he was only beginning to understand. Patricia Hayes asked the question that was probably troubling everyone in the room. How many other employees know about the Meridian Holdings ownership structure? Are there other people working here under different assumptions about the company's actual governance? The question revealed the extent to which Sterling Creative Agency's operations had been based on incomplete information and misunderstood relationships. The morning's revelations were going to require comprehensive reassessment of roles, responsibilities, and reporting structures throughout the organization. Patricia, most Sterling employees understand their own roles and responsibilities without needing detailed knowledge of ownership structures and investment partnerships. However, leadership positions require clear understanding of authority, accountability, and strategic direction. That clarity has been missing from Sterling's operations for several months. Marcus finally asked the direct question that had been underlying the entire conversation. Nina, what do I need to do to maintain my position at Sterling Creative Agency? What would convince Meridian Holdings that I can provide the kind of leadership the company needs for future growth? The question represented the first acknowledgement that his professional survival depended on demonstrating capabilities he had not yet proven and implementing changes he had previously resisted. It also suggested a willingness to accept guidance and feedback that had been notably absent from his leadership approach. The question hung in the air like a challenge, and I could see Marcus finally grasping the reality that his future at Sterling Creative Agency depended entirely on his willingness to confront truths he had been avoiding for months. The man who had strutted into this conference room expecting to cement his authority was now asking for guidance on how to salvage his career from the wreckage of his own arrogance. Marcus, that's exactly the right question, but it comes about 6 months too late, I replied, opening another folder that contained performance evaluations and incident reports that painted a comprehensive picture of his leadership tenure. Meridian Holdings has been documenting concerns about Sterling's direction since shortly after the investment partnership began. Patricia Hayes leaned forward as I spread additional documents across the table, these ones bearing the signatures of Sterling employees who had submitted formal complaints about workplace conduct, creative interference, and management decisions that undermined both morale and productivity. Her notepad remained open, but she had stopped writing, apparently recognizing that the morning's events had moved far beyond anything her documentation could capture or control. These reports detail a pattern of behavior that goes well beyond today's presentation, I continued, watching Marcus's face pale as he recognized names and incidents that he had clearly assumed would remain private. Dismissing employee suggestions without consideration, taking credit for successful campaigns while distancing yourself from failures, creating competitive rather than collaborative work environments. Kevin Walsh was studying the documents with the intense focus of someone calculating whether his own professional decisions had aligned him with a sinking ship. His political instincts had served him well in previous corporate environments, but Sterling Creative Agency's actual power structure had rendered all his careful relationship building irrelevant. Lisa Chen remained silent, though her expression suggested she was reviewing months of office interactions through the lens of information that transformed every conversation, every report, and every strategic decision into evidence of Marcus's fundamental misunderstanding of his own company's governance structure. The Morrison presentation wasn't an isolated incident, I explained, my voice maintaining the professional tone that had carried me through Marcus's attempted humiliation. It was the culmination of a leadership approach that prioritizes personal authority over collaborative success, that treats innovative thinking as a threat rather than an asset, that mistakes control for competence. Marcus attempted to mount a defense, though his position for challenging any of the documented evidence had been completely compromised by the morning's revelations. Nina, some of those complaints were from employees who resisted necessary changes. Sterling Creative Agency needed strong leadership to compete in Denver's marketing landscape. Sometimes tough decisions create temporary friction. The response revealed his continued inability to distinguish between effective leadership and authoritarian management, between necessary guidance and arbitrary control. His attempt to characterize employee concerns as resistance to appropriate authority demonstrated exactly the kind of thinking that had created the crisis he was now facing. Marcus, strong leadership builds consensus around challenging decisions by demonstrating their strategic value and involving affected parties in implementation planning. Authoritarian management creates compliance through intimidation and dismisses legitimate concerns as insubordination. The difference is fundamental, and it determines whether organizations thrive or merely survive. Patricia Hayes had begun reviewing her own interactions with Marcus, probably recognizing that her role in documenting employee performance had been complicated by her failure to understand the actual hierarchy she was supposed to be supporting. Her careful records of disciplinary actions and performance evaluations were now being examined by the person who had ultimate authority over personnel decisions. These employee reports weren't isolated complaints about tough decisions, I continued, selecting specific documents that illustrated the pattern of behavior that had prompted Meridian Holdings to consider direct intervention. They were consistent observations about leadership practices that undermined Sterling's creative potential and damaged relationships with both staff and clients. Kevin Walsh finally asked the question that had been troubling him since the Morrison team departed. Nina, how long has Meridian Holdings been planning to address these management issues? Was today's confrontation inevitable, or could Marcus have avoided this situation with different choices? The answer required acknowledging both the strategic patience that had characterized Meridian Holdings' approach and the specific actions that had finally necessitated direct intervention. Marcus's behavior hadn't occurred in a vacuum. It had been carefully observed and evaluated over months of operational leadership that had consistently fallen short of the standards required for effective partnership. Kevin, Meridian Holdings invested in Sterling Creative Agency because of its potential for growth and market leadership. That investment included confidence that operational management could develop the skills and judgment necessary for long-term success. However, investment partnerships require measurable progress toward agreed-upon goals. Marcus was listening with an intensity that suggested he was finally beginning to understand the consequences of leadership decisions he had made without considering their impact on Sterling's strategic relationships or long-term viability. His assumptions about autonomous authority had blinded him to the reality that his performance was being continuously evaluated against specific criteria. The confrontation wasn't inevitable, but it became necessary when Marcus's leadership approach began threatening Sterling's relationships with major clients and its ability to retain talented employees. Morrison Associates represents exactly the kind of partnership that Sterling needs for sustained growth, and this morning's presentation demonstrated why current management practices were incompatible with those objectives. Lisa Chen spoke up with obvious nervousness, her question revealing the extent to which Sterling's internal communications had failed to convey accurate information about the company's actual governance structure. So when Marcus called all staff meetings to announce strategic initiatives, was he actually implementing decisions that had been made by Meridian Holdings? Were those his strategies or yours? The question touched on one of the most problematic aspects of Marcus's leadership tenure, involving not just his treatment of individual employees but his fundamental misunderstanding of his role within Sterling Creative Agency's corporate structure. His assumption of ultimate decision-making authority had created policy initiatives that directly contradicted the strategic direction that Meridian Holdings had intended to pursue. Lisa, strategic initiatives should emerge from collaborative analysis of market opportunities, competitive advantages, and organizational capabilities. Marcus's approach involved making unilateral decisions based on personal preferences rather than comprehensive evaluation of Sterling's position and potential. Patricia Hayes was reviewing specific policy memos that Marcus had distributed during his tenure as Sterling's operational head, apparently recognizing that many of his strategic announcements had been implemented without the consultation or approval that corporate governance typically required for major directional changes. The all-staff meetings you're referencing announced decisions that contradicted Meridian Holdings' investment strategy and Sterling's agreed-upon growth plan. Those announcements created confusion among employees about the company's direction and priorities, undermining both morale and productivity in ways that directly impacted client relationships and project outcomes.
Marcus finally confronted the central issue that his defensive responses had been avoiding since the Morrison team departed. Nia, if I've been making decisions that contradicted Meridian Holdings' strategic direction, why didn't someone from your organization intervene earlier? Why allow months of policies and initiatives that you knew were problematic? The question revealed his continued focus on external responsibility rather than personal accountability, but it also provided an opportunity to explain the evaluation process that had been guiding Meridian Holdings' approach to the Sterling Creative Agency partnership throughout his troubled tenure as operational leader. Marcus' effective partnerships require trust, and trust develops through demonstrated competence and judgment over time. Meridian Holdings wanted to evaluate your leadership capabilities under realistic conditions rather than micromanaging every decision. However, evaluation periods have limits, and those limits are determined by the impact of leadership choices on organizational performance and strategic objectives. Kevin Walsh was clearly struggling to reconcile his understanding of corporate hierarchy with the reality that his carefully cultivated relationship with Marcus had been based on fundamental misconceptions about authority and influence within Sterling Creative Agency. His next question suggested he was beginning to adapt his political calculations to the actual power structure. So Marcus's authority was always conditional on Meridian Holdings' assessment of his performance, but he didn't understand that his leadership was being evaluated against specific criteria rather than simply accepted as autonomous decision-making. The accuracy of his analysis was both impressive and troubling, revealing how much of Sterling's operational dynamics had been shaped by misunderstandings about responsibility, authority, and accountability that could have been prevented with clearer communication about corporate governance expectations. Kevin, all leadership authority within partnership structures involves accountability to stakeholders and strategic objectives. Marcus's assumption that operational control equated to ultimate decision-making power represented a fundamental misunderstanding of Sterling Creative Agency's corporate structure and Meridian Holdings' investment expectations. Patricia Hayes had been quietly reviewing the employee complaints and performance evaluations that documented the impact of Marcus's leadership decisions on Sterling's workplace culture and operational effectiveness. Her question revealed growing awareness of the legal and regulatory implications of the management practices she had been supporting. Nina, some of these employee reports describe workplace conditions that could expose Sterling Creative Agency to significant liability if they continued unchecked. Were there legal concerns that influenced Meridian Holdings' decision to intervene directly in operational management? The question addressed one of the most serious aspects of Marcus's leadership tenure, involving not just poor judgment and ineffective management but specific behaviors that created potential legal exposure for Sterling Creative Agency and its investment partners. Corporate liability extended far beyond financial performance to include workplace safety, employment practices, and regulatory compliance. Patricia, corporate partnerships involve shared liability for management decisions and operational practices. Meridian Holdings has legal obligations to ensure that Sterling Creative Agency maintains compliance with employment regulations, workplace safety standards, and professional service requirements. Some of Marcus's leadership decisions created exposure that required immediate attention. Marcus was finally beginning to grasp the full scope of the professional crisis he had created through months of decisions that he had made without understanding their legal, financial, and strategic implications. His attempt to demonstrate executive authority had actually exposed Sterling Creative Agency to risks that threatened both its operational viability and its investment partnerships. The liability concerns weren't limited to employee relations, I continued, selecting documents that detailed client complaints and contract disputes that had emerged during Marcus's tenure as operational leader. Several major accounts had expressed concerns about Sterling's creative direction and professional standards. Morrison Associates wasn't our first potential client to question whether Sterling Creative Agency could deliver the strategic thinking and innovative solutions they needed. Lisa Chen looked genuinely shocked as she processed the information about client dissatisfaction that had apparently been concealed from Sterling's general staff. Her role in the office communication network had given her access to gossip and speculation, but the actual performance data revealed problems far more serious than workplace drama. Marcus, your leadership approach wasn't just affecting internal operations, it was damaging Sterling's reputation in Denver's marketing community and undermining relationships with existing clients who had invested significant resources in collaborative partnerships with our agency. Kevin Walsh was taking comprehensive notes now, probably recognizing that his survival within Sterling Creative Agency's restructured organization would depend on demonstrating value and adaptability rather than political loyalty to discredited leadership. His question revealed strategic thinking about the practical implications of the morning's revelations. Nina, when you mentioned changes in leadership structure and creative direction, are you planning to assume direct operational control of Sterling Creative Agency, or will there be opportunities for existing management to demonstrate improved performance under Meridian Holdings' guidance? The question addressed the central issue that everyone in Conference Room A was contemplating but had been reluctant to ask directly. Marcus's professional future depended on the answer, but so did the career prospects of everyone who had aligned themselves with his leadership approach during his tenure as Sterling's operational head. Kevin, Meridian Holdings' primary objective is Sterling Creative Agency's long-term success and growth. That objective is best served by leadership that demonstrates competence, character, and commitment to collaborative excellence rather than personal authority. Changes in organizational structure will be determined by evidence of improved performance rather than abstract promises of future reform. Marcus finally asked the direct question that would determine his immediate professional fate. Nina, what specific changes would I need to demonstrate to convince Meridian Holdings that I can provide effective leadership for Sterling Creative Agency? What would prove that I understand the problems you've identified and can implement solutions that support the company's strategic objectives? The question represented the first acknowledgement that his continued employment depended on fundamental changes in his approach to leadership, collaboration, and strategic thinking. It also suggested a willingness to accept feedback and guidance that had been notably absent from his previous interactions with both employees and stakeholders. The question Marcus posed carried the weight of a man finally recognizing that his professional survival depended on acknowledging failures he had spent months denying. I studied his face, searching for genuine understanding rather than the calculated desperation that often emerged when people faced consequences for their actions. The transformation from arrogant certainty to humble inquiry represented progress, but words were easily spoken when careers hung in the balance. Marcus, the changes required aren't simply behavioral adjustments or policy modifications. They involve fundamental shifts in how you understand leadership, collaboration, and accountability within Sterling Creative Agency's structure. I replied, gathering the scattered documents that had documented his problematic tenure. Meridian Holdings needs evidence of genuine transformation rather than strategic compliance designed to preserve your position. Patricia Hayes had been unusually quiet during this final phase of our confrontation, probably calculating how the morning's revelations would affect her own role within Sterling's evolving organizational structure. Her careful documentation of employee issues had been thorough, but her failure to escalate serious concerns to appropriate authorities raised questions about her understanding of corporate governance and professional responsibility. The first requirement involves acknowledging that effective leadership emerges from competence and character rather than titles and presumed authority. Your approach to managing Sterling Creative Agency has been based on assumptions about hierarchy that don't align with collaborative excellence or strategic innovation. Kevin Walsh was listening with the focused attention of someone whose political instincts had finally adapted to the actual power dynamics within Sterling Creative Agency. His survival within the organization would depend on demonstrating value through contribution rather than loyalty to discredited leadership, and he was clearly recalibrating his professional approach accordingly. The second requirement involves developing systems that prioritize collective success over personal recognition. Sterling's potential depends on creating environments where talented people can contribute their best work rather than navigating political dynamics and personal ego management. Lisa Chen remained silent, but her expression suggested she was processing information that challenged her understanding of office dynamics and professional relationships. The woman who had been documenting and sharing workplace gossip was beginning to recognize that her communication network had been based on incomplete and often inaccurate information about Sterling's actual governance structure. Marcus, these aren't abstract concepts or theoretical improvements. They require specific measurable changes in how you interact with colleagues, how you evaluate ideas and proposals, how you represent Sterling Creative Agency to clients and partners, and how you contribute to strategic planning rather than dominating it. The weight of genuine accountability was settling over Marcus as he realized that his continued employment would require sustained demonstration of capabilities he had not yet proven rather than promises of future reform. His next question revealed growing awareness of the comprehensive nature of the transformation that would be necessary. Nina, what would that demonstration look like in practical terms? How would Meridian Holdings evaluate whether I'm implementing the kind of changes you're describing rather than simply modifying my behavior to avoid additional confrontations? The question showed encouraging progress in his thinking, moving beyond defensive responses toward genuine engagement with the feedback he was receiving. However, transformation required more than intellectual understanding. It demanded consistent application of improved judgment and collaborative skills under real-world pressure. Marcus evaluation involves observing how you handle disagreement and criticism, how you respond to innovative ideas that challenge your preferences, how you support colleagues' professional development rather than viewing their success as competition, and how you contribute to client relationships rather than controlling them. Patricia Hayes finally spoke up, her question revealing concerns about the practical implications of restructuring Sterling Creative Agency's leadership hierarchy while maintaining operational continuity and professional standards. Nina, if Marcus remains in his current role, what safeguards would ensure that the problems you've identified don't resurface once the immediate crisis passes? The question addressed one of the most challenging aspects of corporate reform, involving not just individual behavior modification but systemic changes that would prevent the recurrence of problematic leadership patterns. Lasting improvement required structural adjustments rather than relying solely on personal transformation promises. Patricia's safeguards involve establishing clear accountability measures, regular performance reviews that include feedback from colleagues and clients, transparent decision-making processes that require consultation rather than unilateral authority, and direct reporting relationships with Meridian Holdings for strategic initiatives and policy changes. Kevin Walsh was taking detailed notes, probably recognizing that his own survival within Sterling's restructured organization would depend on adapting to governance systems that prioritized competence and collaboration over political maneuvering and personal loyalty. His question revealed strategic thinking about the practical implementation of improved management practices. Would these accountability measures apply to all Sterling employees, or would they be specific to leadership positions that carry strategic responsibility for the company's direction and client relationships? The question demonstrated improving understanding of how corporate governance typically addressed different levels of responsibility and authority within organizational structures. However, effective accountability required consistency across all levels rather than selective application based on titles or perceived importance. Kevin accountability measures should reflect the scope of each person's influence on Sterling Creative Agency's success and reputation. However, the principles of collaborative excellence, professional integrity, and strategic thinking apply to everyone who contributes to client relationships and project outcomes. Lisa Chen asked her first substantive question of the morning, revealing concerns about workplace dynamics that went beyond the immediate crisis of Marcus's leadership failures. Nina, how will these changes affect day-to-day operations and working relationships? Will there be additional supervision or monitoring that makes everyone feel like they're under constant evaluation? The question touched on legitimate concerns about creating productive work environments that encouraged innovation and risk-taking rather than defensive compliance with surveillance systems. Effective accountability enhanced rather than inhibited professional creativity and collaborative excellence. Lisa, productive accountability involves establishing clear expectations and providing regular feedback rather than creating surveillance systems or punitive monitoring. The objective is supporting everyone's professional development and contribution rather than documenting failures or compliance violations. Marcus had been listening to this discussion of accountability measures and structural changes with obvious anxiety, probably recognizing that his professional future would involve significantly less autonomy and considerably more oversight than he had exercised during his troubled tenure as Sterling's operational leader. Nina, I understand that my leadership approach has created serious problems for Sterling Creative Agency and Meridian Holdings. I'm willing to implement whatever changes are necessary to demonstrate that I can contribute effectively to the company's success rather than undermining it. The statement represented progress, but words were easily spoken when consequences loomed. Genuine transformation required sustained commitment to difficult changes rather than strategic compliance designed to preserve his position until attention shifted to other concerns. Marcus' willingness to change is an important first step, but Meridian Holdings needs evidence of actual improvement rather than statements of intention. That evidence will emerge through your daily interactions, decision-making processes, and contributions to Sterling's strategic objectives over time. Patricia Hayes was reviewing her documentation with obvious concern, probably recognizing that her role in supporting Marcus's leadership approach had been based on incomplete understanding of Sterling Creative Agency's actual governance structure and performance standards. Her question revealed awareness of her own need for professional development. Nina, what guidance would help Sterling support staff adapt to the organizational changes you're implementing? How can we ensure that our contributions align with Meridian Holdings' expectations rather than perpetuating the problems that led to this morning's confrontation? The question demonstrated encouraging awareness that effective reform required participation from everyone within Sterling's organizational structure rather than focusing solely on senior leadership behavior. However, sustainable change demanded clear communication about expectations and regular feedback about performance. Patricia, the most important guidance involves understanding that everyone's professional success depends on Sterling Creative Agency's ability to deliver exceptional results for clients while maintaining collaborative work environments that attract and retain talented people. Kevin Walsh had been calculating the implications of Sterling's restructured governance for his own career trajectory, and his next question revealed strategic thinking about positioning himself advantageously within the company's evolving organizational dynamics. Nina, would there be opportunities for existing employees to take on additional responsibilities or leadership roles as Sterling Creative Agency expands its operations and client relationships under Meridian Holdings' strategic direction? The question showed encouraging focus on contribution and growth rather than simply preserving existing positions within Sterling's hierarchy. However, advancement opportunities would depend on demonstrated competence and collaborative excellence rather than political positioning or personal relationships. Kevin Sterling's growth will create numerous opportunities for increased responsibility and leadership development. However, those opportunities will be earned through proven performance and strategic thinking rather than assumed based on tenure or existing relationships. Lisa Chen was clearly processing information about workplace dynamics that challenged her previous understanding of office politics and professional advancement. Her question revealed growing awareness that her communication network had been based on assumptions rather than accurate information about Sterling's actual operations. So the changes you're implementing will affect not just management practices but also how employees interact with each other and contribute to project outcomes. Will there be training or guidance to help everyone adapt to these new expectations? The question demonstrated appropriate concern about supporting organizational transition while maintaining productivity and professional standards. However, effective change required both systematic guidance and individual commitment to improve performance rather than relying solely on formal training programs. Lisa organizational development involves both formal guidance and ongoing coaching that helps everyone contribute their best work while building collaborative relationships that enhance rather than complicate project outcomes. The discussion continued for another 30 minutes, covering practical details about reporting structures, performance evaluation criteria, and implementation timelines for Sterling Creative Agency's governance reforms. Marcus participated with obvious nervousness but genuine engagement, apparently recognizing that his professional survival depended on demonstrating adaptability rather than defending his previous approach. As our meeting concluded, I gathered the documents that had exposed the full scope of Sterling's organizational challenges while providing the foundation for comprehensive reform. The morning that had begun with Marcus's planned humiliation of my work had transformed into a master class in corporate governance, accountability, and the consequences of mistaking authority for competence. Marcus, your willingness to acknowledge these problems and commit to fundamental changes represents important progress. However, Meridian Holdings will evaluate your continued leadership based on sustained demonstration of improved judgment and collaborative excellence rather than promises of future reform. The man who had strutted into conference room A expecting to cement his executive authority was leaving with a clear understanding that his professional future depended entirely on his ability to transform his approach to leadership, collaboration, and strategic thinking. His assumption of autonomous control had been replaced by accountability to standards he had previously ignored. Patricia Hayes, Kevin Walsh, and Lisa Chen departed with obvious uncertainty about their own roles within Sterling's evolving organizational structure, but also with clearer understanding of the performance expectations that would guide their professional development. The morning's revelations had affected everyone who had assumed that Sterling Creative Agency operated according to the hierarchy that Marcus had presented rather than the partnership structure that actually governed its operations. 3 months later, I sat in my renovated office overlooking downtown Denver, reviewing Sterling Creative Agency's remarkable transformation under restructured leadership and governance. The Morrison Associates contract had been finalized within weeks of our conference room confrontation, providing both financial stability and strategic validation for the innovative marketing approaches that Marcus had dismissed so dramatically. Marcus remained with Sterling Creative Agency, though in a significantly reduced role that focused on his genuine strengths in client relations while eliminating his authority over creative strategy and personnel decisions. His adaptation to collaborative leadership had been gradual but genuine, apparently motivated by recognition that his previous approach had nearly destroyed both his career and the company he had helped build. The accountability measures we had implemented were producing remarkable results throughout Sterling's operations. Employee satisfaction surveys showed dramatic improvement in workplace culture and professional development opportunities. Client retention had increased substantially as our creative teams were empowered to pursue innovative solutions rather than safe predictability. New business development was exceeding projections as word spread about Sterling's renewed creative energy and strategic sophistication. Patricia Hayes had enrolled in corporate governance certification programs, apparently recognizing that her role in supporting organizational excellence required deeper understanding of legal and regulatory requirements. Kevin Walsh had emerged as a valuable contributor to strategic planning initiatives, his political instincts redirected toward building consensus around challenging objectives rather than managing personal relationships with perceived authority figures. Lisa Chen had become one of Sterling's most effective internal communicators, her natural curiosity about workplace dynamics channeled into formal responsibilities for employee engagement and organizational development. The woman who had once documented and shared gossip about supposed professional failures was now facilitating communication that enhanced rather than undermined collaborative excellence. My phone buzzed with a message from James Morrison, whose company had become one of Sterling Creative Agency's most valued strategic partners. The campaign we had developed for their product launch was exceeding performance targets while generating industry recognition for innovative approaches to brand positioning and market development. The afternoon sun streaming through my office windows illuminated financial reports that told the story of Sterling's remarkable recovery and growth under Meridian Holdings' strategic guidance. The company that had been struggling with internal conflicts and declining client satisfaction was now positioned as one of Denver's most dynamic marketing agencies, attracting both talented employees and prestigious accounts. The transformation hadn't been limited to Sterling Creative Agency's operations. My experience navigating corporate partnership challenges had led to consulting opportunities with other companies facing similar governance and leadership issues. The lessons learned from Marcus's dramatic misunderstanding of authority and accountability were proving valuable for organizations throughout Colorado's business community. As I prepared to leave the office, I reflected on the morning 3 months earlier when Marcus Thompson had attempted to destroy my credibility while positioning himself as Sterling Creative Agency's creative authority. His theatrical dismissal of my marketing concepts had been designed to demonstrate his executive superiority, but it had instead revealed his fundamental ignorance about the company's actual ownership structure and strategic direction. The silence partner he had never bothered to identify had finally spoken up, and the conversation had transformed not just Sterling Creative Agency's governance but also the careers of everyone who had participated in that remarkable morning. Sometimes the most satisfying victories emerge from allowing people to demonstrate exactly who they are when they believe no one important is watching. The elevator descended through Sterling Creative Agency's floors, past bustling offices where talented people were contributing their best work to challenging projects and collaborative relationships. The company that had once been constrained by authoritarian leadership and political dynamics had become a testament to the power of competence, accountability, and strategic thinking. Outside, Denver's downtown energy reflected the kind of innovation and growth that Sterling Creative Agency was now contributing to rather than simply observing. The mountains in the distance reminded me that perspective was everything, and that sometimes the most important lessons emerged from the most unexpected teachers. Marcus Thompson had taught me that underestimating people was one of the most expensive mistakes anyone could make in business or life. His assumption that humiliating me would enhance his reputation had instead provided the perfect opportunity to demonstrate the difference between actual authority and presumed control, between genuine competence and theatrical performance. The story of how my boss humiliated me in front of clients while never knowing I was the silent partner had become a reminder that the most powerful lessons often came disguised as defeats. Sometimes the best response to attempted destruction was simply revealing the truth and letting competence speak for itself. As I drove through Denver's streets toward home, I smiled at the memory of Marcus's confident smirk when he had first begun his presentation that morning. The man who had been so certain of his authority and creative superiority had learned that real power came from contribution rather than control, from building rather than undermining, from elevating rather than diminishing the people around you. The transformation of Sterling Creative Agency stood as proof that the worst betrayals could become catalysts for the best outcomes, that the most humiliating moments could lead to the most empowering realizations. And that sometimes the people who tried to destroy you ended up teaching you exactly how strong you really were. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.